Good evening, guys, y muy buenas tardes. My name is Aquiles Jaime Garza. My friends and family call me Jimmy, and my friends in the GOP just call me Adrian's husband. So, pretty simple. Well, tonight's my honor to introduce our next speaker and tell you a little bit about him. George P. Bush was the first Bush that I ever met. In 2012, Adrian met George P. at a Republican National Convention in Tampa with her dad. That evening, she would call me and tell me that she had committed us to do a fundraiser for George P. Bush and the Hispanic Republicans of Texas, a PAC which he had recently co-founded. At this point, folks, we had never done an event at our house, much less an event for a Bush. So it was pretty intense, and quite honestly, the first thing I had to do was do a quick internet search and realize that George P. Bush, he looked nothing like the other two George Bushes I'd ever met. This guy, he looked more like he could be like, I don't know, maybe my primo from Guanajuato. He was tall, he was dark, and he was Bush. I learned quickly that George P. Bush was a man of God, that he was born in Houston, Texas, the son of Jeb and Columba Garnica Gallo. He graduated from Rice University and the University of Texas Law. He was an intelligence officer in the Navy. He deployed under a different name to Afghanistan, and he served proudly in Operation Enduring Freedom. In other words, he was pretty badass. The fundraiser at our home ended up being one of the single largest fundraisers that HRT had that year. George was a pretty easy sell. Folks in the Valley loved him, and he promised to return. And boy, did he return. He kept returning 17 times to be exact. And there was only one rule in every one of those trips. It was, Jimmy, we need to go to places that Republicans have never gone. So we did. Our first stop was the Pulga de Alamo. For those of you that don't speak Spanish, that's a flea market right off of 83 here in Alamo. Well, for the last 10 years, we've crisscrossed the Rio Grande Valley. We've been building relationships with city leaders and school leaders, with all the citizens of the smaller communities. We've been to Elsa, we've been to Palmhurst, to Donna, and to San Juan. And we've been to Laguna Vista and Port Isabel, a lot of the smaller communities that Republicans don't go and that Democrats take for granted. At one point at a county event, the county judge asked George publicly, he said, "Have you moved down here, George?" Because he sees them so much at new events. I've come to realize that George P. Bush will be a friend of the Valley for life. He will be a passionate advocate for our region for decades. I admire his vision of investing the early years of his political career not only in Hidalgo County, but in our GOP. Folks, we are his base. And like President Trump said about George P., and I quote, "I like him. He's going far. He's going places. This is the Bush that got it right." Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome back to the Rio Grande Valley, Commissioner George P. Bush.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Jimmy, like a lot of Bushes, you married way up. Adrian's been phenomenal tonight. I look at this room, I look at what you've built here, and it's breathtaking. As the governor has said, this is the best party operation in the state, and I'm proud to join you all tonight. I'm thankful for our leadership in the great state of Texas. Justice Guzman, Governor Abbott, great local leadership. Came this close. We're busting down the door next election cycle. And the turnaround in Texas starts right here in the Rio Grande Valley. We are brought together tonight because of two towering heroes of American history, Abraham Lincoln and Ronald Reagan. Abraham Lincoln is the greatest president in our country's history. Took on the Confederacy, ended the Civil War, freed the slaves, and in the end gave his life for the higher ideas that are embodied in the Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution. Ronald Reagan, the most successful president of the 20th century. With the help of, it's okay to clap about Ronald Reagan. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Along with George H.W. Bush, ended the Cold War, liberated millions from totalitarianism, and did his best on the 40-year anniversary to not give his life. He fought for the ideas, the higher ideas of our country. In this time, we face challenges, not the types of challenges that they faced. Lincoln with the sovereignty of this country under attack, and Reagan facing a bullet himself, the Cold War, but with his disarming humor on this 40th anniversary, I thought I'd share a joke. Some of you may be reading about that book from Jim Baker, where he asked Jim if his nurses and his doctor were Republican, because he wanted to recover okay after getting shot. It was that kind of humor that was disarming even to the most extreme leftists of his time. But as the governor said, in today's era, in 2021, we face socialism with a smile. But I think we have to give credit to the left, right? We knew when we saw Bernie Sanders in his campaign, when we saw Joe Biden, that they told us exactly what they would do if they took the White House and the Senate and the House. They said they'd raise your taxes. They said they'd grow government. They said they'd take your guns. They said that they would open the borders. And look what's happening. AOC and the gang told us that with the Green New Deal that they would shut down the oil and gas industry. They said that they would put the planes on the ground. And Jimmy, since you're in agriculture, they said that they'd monitor cow flatulence because of methane emissions. That's where we are, ladies and gentlemen, with the modern day left. But we as conservatives offer something different. As Justice Guzman said, equality of opportunity, not equality of results. We stand for timeless values that stand the test of time even before the Constitution was drafted. Values like the Second Amendment. The founders knew exactly what they were talking about when it came down to the bearing of arms. They knew that from the British example, that with an overreach of a federal government, that a well-informed citizenry needs to defend itself. And the Second Amendment was drafted to protect our own personal livelihoods, our places of residence, our family members, those that we love. But yet the modern day left wants to continue to take those guns. The Constitution also provided for other values that we fight for tonight, like the rights of the unborn children in our country. Defunding that starts with defunding Planned Parenthood in the state of Texas and around our country. That means praying for those in our crisis pregnancy centers throughout the state, and praying that those that are faced with that choice, that they think about the sanctity of life, and that we create that culture of life right here in Texas. As the governor mentioned, another value that we fight for is the sanctity of our elections. There should never be a doubt in our country about the valid results at the ballot box. To buy prescription drugs, to get on a plane, you need an ID, right? But yet for the most fundamental constitutional duty that we have, and that is to vote, somehow the left is upset with showing up with an ID. That's absolutely wrong. So I'm proud to tell you that at the land office, we've been a part of this fight. And shoulder to shoulder with Governor Abbott, we took on the Obama administration on the boundaries of the other side of the state of Texas, in the Red River. You may have followed this case, where we took on the Obama administration. They made claim to 50,000 acres of ranch land, farmland, generations, much like in the valley, that have owned this land and patiently paid their property tax. But yet an overwhelming federal government comes to Texas and tries to take their land from them. We joined in the lawsuit, and thanks to the Trump administration, we got a favorable settlement. And the ranchers can sleep at night up in the North Texas area. We saw radical environmental plaintiff attorneys coming in from San Francisco and New York attempting to list more species. As conservatives, we need to define success by taking species off the list. right? Only 1% of species that have been listed since the 70s have been delisted. The golden cheek warbler, a Central Texas songbird, was starting to affect our combat readiness. Fort Hood, Texas, the largest military installation in North America, was suddenly under attack. We visited with the garrison commander. He told us that because of the golden cheek warbler, his acreage was somehow impacted, and suddenly he couldn't send and prepare his troops as readily as he could in the middle of Iraq and Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, when we're talking about national security being impacted by, and I love the songbird, it's great, it's a pretty bird, but that's a problem. That's a problem. And so at the land office, we've also been taking the fight to the Biden administration. And Governor Abbott had great vision because he's been in the trenches before. He saw what was coming. And lo and behold, we've seen more executive orders come from this president than any other president in modern American history. And so what we did at the land office was set up the Legal Defense Task Force to push back, get together with community stakeholders, property owners, and prepare to get involved in the courthouse and push back on this overreach that we're seeing from the modern day left. As we promote these conservative values, travel in the valley, spreading the good message of conservative ideas and conservative government and leading to the prosperity that we've enjoyed as Texans, I ask each and every one of you that when we do this without hatred. We do this without pettiness. We do this without being ugly. That we follow the example of Abraham Lincoln and of Ronald Reagan. That we do this with transparency, integrity, and character. Here in Texas, we're rightful to criticize Hunter Biden, right? When President Trump got elected in 2016, he was absolutely right when he said, drain the swamp in Washington, D.C. There's way too much corruption in Washington, D.C., way too much corruption in Austin, Texas. And so when we take on that corruption and we condemn Hunter Biden, we also have got to think about ourselves and the Republican Party. We have a statewide elected official, one of the most powerful offices in our state, that continually abuses the office time and time and time again. So for those of you that love sports, you know that when you're talking about football, when you're talking about baseball, you got to put the best team on the field. And as we approach 2022, I'm going to ask you all to give careful consideration as to who we put on that field. And I look forward to visiting with you on that. So let's send a message to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer in 22. It's time for you to retire. Been in Congress too long. When it comes to the squad, we're not going to kowtow to your ideas. And most importantly, let's end cancel culture in the United States of America. I'm the father of a 7 and a 5-year-old. Pretty soon I won't have anything to read to them. I mean, Dr. Seuss and Mr. Potato Head are suddenly off the list. But in all seriousness, this cancel culture is what we've seen on college campuses throughout the country. But now it's entering the public square. If you hold ideas different from the mainstream media or the modern day left, suddenly your professional career is canceled. You get doxxed. People show up at your home. They harass you and your family if you're sitting down in a restaurant. This has got to end. We've got to stand for the First Amendment and allow for a free expression of ideas. That's what made our country great. So this fight is about freedom. Freedom to live our lives, freedom to run our businesses, freedom to keep our guns, freedom to protect the unborn, freedom to keep Texas great. This is our moment. This is our mission. Let's do this together. May God bless each and every one of you. May God bless the United States of America.